So, welcome. My name is Denise Fowler. I'm the Director of Career Development, Career Advancement, and Alumni Services for the Trachtenberg School for Public Policy and Public Administration. This program is open up to all GW graduate students, so we are thrilled to have such a wonderful representation here today for this Career Catalyst series, which we started in last spring to really be able to offer our students and our alumni access to faculty alumni expertise on very timely topics in this current job market. So I want to thank Professor Joseph Ersheim for offering to do this again for us. This is such a fascinating topic, and our fantastic alumni that are here today, all Trachtenberg alumni, Olivia Barrow-Strauss, Garrett Jackson, and Brett Theodos. As I mentioned, this is plenty of time for informal conversation. I'm also going to put in the chat for those of you who are Trachtenberg. There is a lot of upcoming events that I'm going to share, several career catalyst programs that are going to be coming, working with an executive recruiter, how to be an independent consultant, one of our alum that used to work doing global energy at Apple. So I'm going to put some of those in the chat. Hope to have some of you join us. Some of the events we're running, like we have one tomorrow at CNA, National Security Firm, is open to the graduate community. So I will put them all in there and would love to have you join us. But you are not here to listen to me. You are here to listen to these wonderful experts. So I am going to turn it over to Joseph.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Denise. And we have a great panel. So we're going to jump in. We're going to make this pretty informal. As Denise said, I have been a adjunct faculty member at GW for it's like going on 15 years now. It's crazy how long. And in addition to that, my day job is at the Federal Reserve, where I do banking policy. And I am so thrilled to have this panel. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. But before I do that, for those of you that are still contemplating future classes, I'll be teaching a class in the spring called Banking and Financial Institutions Policy. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. I'll put my contact information in the chat. So if you want to do that, I think it's on Monday nights. And then I teach a class in the summer called Policy Issues in Corporate Social Responsibility and Impact Investing. Some of you, I think I see some familiar faces who have taken that class. So with that, I'm going to turn to the panel. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves, and let's just start just looking at my screen. I see Olivia, you're kind of in the upper left-hand side. So why don't you start and just kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Garrett and then to Brett.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see some familiar names and faces on the screen today. My name is Olivia Barrow-Strauss. I am currently the Vice President of Neighborhood Development at JP Morgan Chase. So in this role, I sit in corporate responsibility, so the firm's corporate responsibility function, and I have the privilege of working across our national housing philanthropy and our national housing policy work. So we'll get into a little bit more about what that means, but essentially I have the immense privilege of working with our various business leaders, folks who finance housing, folks who make mortgages, and then translate that with other philanthropic resources, community partners, and relationships, and try and scale up systemic solutions to the housing affordability crisis.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll get into it as Olivia said. Garrett, do you want to go?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Garrett Jackson, from the DC area, born and raised, and excited to be here with you all, class of 2013, public policy. And I lead philanthropy and communications as the Vice President of Philanthropy and Communications for True Ground Housing Partners. We're an affordable housing developer located in Arlington, Virginia, with properties all throughout the DMV, and very excited to talk with you all here today.
Awesome. And Brett, last but not least.
Hi, I'm Brett. I sit at the Urban Institute, which is a nonprofit research group here in DC. We're right next to HUD and between that and the Spy Museum. And I'm old, so I graduated GPPI before it was Trachtenberg, and that was 2005. And it was great. And I lead a practice at Urban focused on mission finance and community development, small business topics. I have been here 20 years, so after the master's, and I got a PhD part-time while working at Urban at a different institution, and so can talk to you a little bit about the more academic side or the more kind of policy research angle. And Olivia and Garrett are amazing. So if this speaks to what Trachtenberg is turning out, y'all are doing great.
Yeah, no, I'm so psyched for this panel, and people should get questions ready and raise your hand if you have them. I'm just going to start us off, and I'm just going to see how much content we can produce in 1 hour. The whole purpose of this panel is really to get people aware of careers, different career opportunities in different aspects of community development and banking. So I'm going to start, Olivia, you up first, and just if you could sort of talk about your journey. I mean, you already mentioned where you work now, but maybe where you were before at a couple CDFIs. What drew you to the field? And I always wonder, is this something people knew they wanted to do when they were in grad school, or did they decide later? And then a little bit about what you do at JPMC, including some of the policy work you're doing.
Yeah, so I should have mentioned I finished my MPA in 2017, and I actually did both undergrad and grad school at GW. So, I fell into the role that I'm in now, and I'm glad I did. I set out knowing that I wanted to do something social policy related, and having gone to GW for undergrad, I think everyone knows that one of the main values of GW is the proximity to countless internship opportunities. And I really took advantage of that. I did every type of internship you could ever imagine, the classic Hill internship, some administration internships, nonprofit, social services, think tank, all of it. And really where that led me was sort of understanding that I liked policy more than politics, and I liked sort of the think tank world. And so when I was doing my final year of grad school, I sort of fell into this internship opportunity at Enterprise Community Partners. I had applied for a policy internship on their tax policy team. And I only knew a little bit about the housing industry. I had touched on it as part of just naturally looking into social policy type of roles and internships. And I immediately fell in love with it. So it was actually the same semester I started interning at Enterprise was the semester I took Professor Fershein's community development policy class. I went in cold. I knew nothing really about the housing policy industry. And I would go to my internship during the day. I would learn about all of these incredibly fascinating policies and programs to help finance housing and sort of the politics that went alongside it. And then I would go to class in the evening and learn about the same policies and programs and kind of learn about it from the more academic perspective, and really got to tie together that policy and practice angle. So I eventually ended up moving into a full-time role at Enterprise, and obviously graduated with my MPA. And the rest is really history, right? Like I immediately fell in love with this world, the community development housing world, because it touches everything, right? Like I did get the social policy work that I set out for, but I also got tax policy, and I got financial institutions, and it touches climate policy, it touches transportation. We're talking about literally building homes, so you're talking about construction and labor. It's everything, and so you can kind of never get bored when it comes to this world. So I spent a couple of years at Enterprise in that first role there, a national nonprofit housing organization, as well as a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. So I was primarily doing Hill advocacy at that point, a lot of coalition management, sort of policy analysis and writing. I eventually moved to another CDFI called the Low Income Investment Fund, where I was doing a similar role. But in addition to the policy work, I started taking on a little bit more of programmatic work and sort of programmatic design and strategy. And that positioned me really well to eventually apply for this role at JPMorgan Chase, which is a philanthropy role and is not something that I ever anticipated I would, be qualified for a philanthropy role. I was like, who's going to let me give out money? But really, at the end of the day, like philanthropy is systems change, and you can't have effective philanthropy without strong policy and kind of vice versa. So when I applied for and was hired for this role, I remember the hiring manager at the time said, this is a philanthropy role, not a policy role. Are you okay with that? And I said, yes, right. It's all systems change. It's all trying to move towards the same goal. And I would say that I think as a result, I have been incredibly fortunate to be effective in this role because of that sort of broader strategic thinking and analysis and sort of subject matter expertise in the roles that led up to this one.
That is awesome. Really great. And we're going to have time, I think, to get into some of the career stuff in a second, but I want to make sure I go around the horn. Garrett, what's your origin story? Like, how did you end up at doing affordable housing development from Trachtenberg?
Yeah, the story briefly starts just a little bit about how I got to Trachtenberg. So, said I'm a native of this area. Shortly after undergrad, I moved to Chicago, and that was my first time living truly in a city and having an understanding of the different types of housing product that was out there. And I was living on the south side of Chicago, not super far from President Obama's house, and even in that environment, saw just how widely different access to resources was in that part of Chicago, Bronzeville. And so that eventually led to the bug of interest in affordable housing and housing policy in general. So I decided to come back to DC, shacked back up at home with mom and dad, who were more than happy to have me come back, at least I say so. And then spent the next couple of years learning in one of my first classes was Professor Fershine's class around community development and policy management, and immediately fell in love with what Enterprise Community Partners was doing, albeit up the street in Columbia, Maryland, and just understanding more about the work. And I think that kind of set within me a fire that I knew was there, that I had kind of grown and cultivated a little bit a few years prior, but now put some meat on the bone so I could actually go out there and think about how to do it. But it was interesting. I bounced around quite a bit before I got to True Ground. And so I was both in the corporate side of work, not even necessarily in philanthropy, not even necessarily in housing, but learning a lot of other skill sets that ended up being beneficial for me once I got into the role that I'm currently in. And so I think the short of it is I stayed very curious and very persistent, and wanting to stay in the space and be impactful in this space. And I've had the pleasure of working both on the services side and a little bit more toward the development side from more of a philanthropy perspective. But it's really been a fun journey. So excited to tell you all more about it.
Awesome. That is a great journey. And then Brett, you're probably the one most positioned. I mean, you've had a perch really for 20 years looking at this industry from the research side, but also, what's going on at HUD, what's going on at some of the tax programs. So I'd love it if you could talk about, sort of your perspective on this industry for students that are maybe considering getting into it. I know the job market's a little rough right now, but where do you see opportunities, I guess, for students, and also what skills? You've done a lot of hiring over the last couple decades, and what skills do you look for in students, and how do people get those skills? Do they get them in school? Do they get them in jobs? Or so anything you could say about the market overall?
I don't know if Denise will or won't like this, but I often say I don't care whether you have an MBA, an MPP, an MPA, a GED, a PhD, a JD. I care if you have a GSD, a get done. Like, that's what I care about. And I have seen people succeed in that from all of those different departments and degrees and levels of degrees and backgrounds. So that's what you need. I think you're well positioned at this institution. I think you're well positioned in this geography. I think you're well positioned. I'm guessing most of your policy or planning, but maybe others too, like in your departments. I don't find that most hirers care all that much about the letters. I find that they do care about your ability to do things quickly, effectively, efficiently, and have a demonstrated track record. Said slightly differently, I'm not hiring people out of a master's degree, and not even always out of a PhD, certainly not out of a bachelor's degree, for their subject matter knowledge. I mean, they should have some interest, they should have some inclination, but they don't need to know the intricacies of everything. I'm hiring based on their potential. And so that is hopefully a good news and
It's
exciting.
very good news. Well, just Brett, just to interrupt real quick. It's like everybody I talked to in my classes over the years, and particularly in recent years, they're really worried about this issue of not being enough of a subject matter expert. They don't know banking. They haven't worked at a bank. They haven't worked for a CDFI. So it's really refreshing to hear what you're saying, that that's okay, right? You can you start, take a step, and then take another step, and it's okay, right? You can learn on the job.
You will learn. I mean, there's just no way to get the depth of knowledge from any class that you will actually need on the job. So having some lay of the land is great. Having an internship that's adjacent or even directly, I would say, to me, that is a bigger differentiator in terms of getting hired than a coursework or even a degree.
That is great. And maybe with that as foundation, I'm just gonna see for our audience, do you have any questions? And like, please feel free to use the hand raising function. This is a great panel. We have great expertise. I could ask questions all day long, but I want to make sure that we have people that, everyone who's here can get your questions answered.
I
And
want
while
to
you're
layer
yeah,
in. I
go
want to
ahead.
layer in one thing that Brett said. That I don't know if Professor Furshine knows this, but when he would go and speak at conferences, I would go and stalk him. I would go, and he didn't necessarily always know I was in the audience, and I didn't necessarily always have a registration pass to get in. But I was determined to be in the space. So like Olivia, I didn't have an internship at Enterprise necessarily. I was at National Governors Association. We were doing some great work there, and it was lots of fun. But I wasn't quite yet into the housing space. And being in DC, there's tons of conferences that are happening, and many that are free or at low cost. And I know Trachtenberg sometimes offers things to help offset some of those. So I would highly, highly, highly encourage where you can tap in, just use all the search functions to find what's going on around. There's tons of housing conferences that are happening, and easy ways that you can get plugged in there. And I find that sometimes that's where you can begin to cultivate those relationships. Oftentimes people are open to having a conversation when you're showing that curiosity. And like Brett said, you can get some stuff done. It opens the doors.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny. I always tell my students it's probably not shouldn't do this, but if you can't get into a conference, they usually don't have a bouncer you can sneak in, so that's fine. Jaya, I think your hand is up, so you'll go first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Furshine, and to all the panelists for doing this. Hi, Olivia. I hope you're doing well. I have been stalking Olivia for a long, long time because because I am someone who is extremely inclined towards the area of philanthropy, community development, and corporate responsibility. So to pull back a bit and give you all a brief background, like I have been working in CSR, my background, because I'm an international student, I began my journey as a CSR professional in India, and I worked with Unilever for 2 years. And then I moved here, did my MPA, worked some interesting internships, but unfortunately, I'm still waiting for that break to carve a niche for myself in the philanthropy sector and especially the CSR world here in America. So I would love to know from our panelists on what your 2 cents are for someone like me who wants to build her career in CSR. And I'm aware that the teams here in corporates are close knit. Entry level positions are almost next to impossible to get, and the competition is pretty serious and competitive. And now for international students, and given the current job market, everything is pretty much against us. So how do you think we could navigate this job market, and how can I get closer to my dream of becoming a CSR professional in future?
I can kick us off there. Hi, Jaya. It's good to see you. One of the things when I do sort of informationals for folks, particularly interested in philanthropy roles and corporate philanthropy, is to say, like, the only reason I got this job was because I had become a subject matter expert in housing, and the team was hiring for a housing expert that happened to be doing philanthropy. So I think of corporate responsibility more as sort of a function or a tool to deploy specific subject area expertise. And I think, to Brett's point earlier, it can be incredibly challenging to just come out of a degree with that deep subject matter expertise that's on the job training. And so my recommendation, particularly because these entry level roles are few and far between, is to find a path to develop some type of deep programmatic or policy expertise, substantive expertise in whatever area it is, and that can usually be a better inroads to some of the, at least the private corporate sort of philanthropy roles that I've experienced.
That's really helpful, Olivia. Anyone else on that? I mean, just the general issue of like, how do you break in? Right now, it's super tough. My general 2 cents worth, Jaya, is just you find things that are adjacent. So, for example, if banks are hiring in compliance, you start there, and then you try to find your way over to like what Olivia has done on the philanthropy side, or maybe you work in a role like as a person who's doing something that's like programmatically related, like Community Reinvestment Act, stuff. And if banks are hiring in that space, that might be a starting place. But Brett, I'd be curious to know, or Garrett, I mean, it's a really tricky thing if jobs are so few and far between. How do you get your foothold?
I would echo that. Slightly answering that question and slightly making a different comment. There are jobs on every side of the angle. Like there are regulatory and compliance jobs in state government that oversee some of these functions, local government sometimes, the NGO sector that's doing and building things like where Garrett at, that's financing them or backstopping them philanthropically like Olivia's doing, that's doing research on the sector. So in every industry association has a headquartered group that is in DC, and not all of them have been doged, and they are still meeting. The National Govers, National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, like, and all the associations that you don't even know about because they're too niche. And so there's a surprising number of jobs, and sometimes they're a little sleepy, and they can be very kind of focused on just a single issue. But it's a place to start to get exposure, to get understanding of the ecosystem and the actors, to build your network. And I think it's sadly true. Like it feels easier to get your next job when you've got a job. And so I am sympathetic when that's not something that's on hand. But I guess I do hopefully want to encourage less pressure. I think this aligns with what was just getting said, like less pressure that the first job is the job that is like uniquely going to, like, if you ever go back and do the opposite, like take some people that are doing interesting things in interesting institutions and go look at how they got there. The paths are so diverse. There is not a single path or way to get to a place.
I love that. And Brett, Garrett just posted something in the chat. Do you want to just say a word about what that is?
Yeah, for sure. So this organization, formerly known as the Housing Association of Nonprofit Developers, just rebranded to Housing And. So where housing is more than just a roof and walls and a door, right? Like sort of that branding frame in mind. They have a job post site there that really touches up and down the scale. I saw some early analyst roles there, and so you can scan those. It covers a pretty wide range of roles, both corporate, private, nonprofit, specifically in the Washington, D.C. region. I wouldn't say it's a stop all for every role necessarily, but they have about 150 or so member organizations that span the gamut of all the ones that I just mentioned. So they do tend to get quite a bit of a play when it comes to acknowledgments about roles and opportunities. So take a look, even if it just gives you tangentially, oh, I didn't even know this organization existed, right? You might begin to bounce around on that organization's site, learn something new about what they do, and that can spark something. So the breadcrumbs, I think, are really probably the most important piece that I would recommend following at this stage, and just staying close to this network, this group of folks who are really chomping at the bit to think through what their next is. You will learn so much from one another. This is not a zero-sum game. All of you are going to be, and I repeat, all of you are going to be successful getting to the next phase in your career. To the extent that you're able to leverage moments like this to help one another, even as we're hopefully doing a little bit here, is just bonus and icing on the cake. But yeah, Hand is a great resource. There are tons of other tools. Right now they're starting to flow in. Thanks, Olivia. We'll make sure that you guys are straight, and happy to be a resource and reference wherever we can.
We'll get to the next question, but I just want to put a pin on something Garrett said. Is it feels stressful right now. You hear all the news about layoffs and, federal government hiring freezes and shutdowns and things. It is legitimately scary, but everybody here, there's a huge network. You're going to get stuff. It's going to work out. I think that's such a positive message. And the other thing I would say is informational interviews are just the way to go. I've had students tell me, I don't know what's not working. I've applied to 1,000 things and I haven't gotten any hits. That's just going to go into the ether. And the way you do it is informational interviews. Use us, use, the GW network, use friends, family, anything. Doesn't really matter. But with that, Pal, do you want to go?
Hi everyone, I'm a second year MPA student focusing in evaluation and analysis. And I'm also an international student on a student visa like Jaya. And I've been following the new H-1B restrictions very closely. And something I've realized that even before these changes, sponsorship was mostly limited to large firms like JP Morgan, for example. But I've noticed that even they seem to be moving away from hiring international candidates and focusing on citizens instead. How are you seeing these shifts play out in your organizations, and what advice would you have for someone like me navigating an already challenging job market?
Wow, great question. I don't know, Brett, you might have the most 10,000-foot view on that, but I don't know, Olivia, if you have visibility into what JP Morgan Chase is doing.
No, I don't have anything specific. For what it's worth, I have not seen any directives come down that there's any official changes or things of that nature. I think all of the existing advice and sort of networking and whatnot stands true. And I know it's particularly challenging right now in that context. But Brett, I don't know if you have a more macro perspective on that.
I don't following the news like you all, but no, nothing more.
Yeah, I wish, we can maybe follow up separately on that, Pal, just to see what resources, and maybe Denise has some ideas, but that's a tough one. Jaron, do you want to go?
Yeah. On my hand. Yeah, so great to see so many of you. I was definitely encouraged to reach out to both Olivia and Garrett when I was applying, and I think this was pre-True Housing and pre JP Morgan. I think you were at Lyft, Olivia, at the time. So incredibly appreciative, and also of you, Professor Fershon, for taking all of your classes. I kind of knew that I wanted to do community development, economic development policy when I got the job that I currently have at the Government Finance Officers Association. And it was actually tax increment financing that impressed my job the most that I knew about from your class with Professor Fershon, which is so niche. I barely use it today, but I guess my question is I just pivoted and got a promotion, and I'm moving away from debt management and towards community development and economic development and capital planning. So I guess I'm wondering, how does one get up to speed in such a vast field? Like, I'm no longer a student. It's just like a vast world out there. There's so many conferences, there's so much information. So like, where does one begin?
Such a great question. I'm going to start, but I'd love for the panel to chime in on this, because in every job, there's just so much knowledge, and how do you even begin to start? What I always tell people is people make the mistake of going too deep too quick. And so you have to start pretty broad, and don't get just pick a place, and know that there's just so much terminology that it's okay if you don't know it. I was telling my class, I had a class on Monday, and I was telling them a funny story that I was in a meeting with a fairly large group of people yesterday, and they were talking about something, and they kept using the acronym FBOs, and what are we going to do with these FBOs? And it turns out the acronym stands for Foreign Banking Organizations. I didn't know, and I knew enough not to ask in that big meeting because I was pretty senior and I didn't want to look like an idiot. But it never ends. Like, it never ends with like the sort of acronyms. And like I think I shared with a few of you guys that I was at Fannie Mae for 2 years before I had the courage to ask what the acronym LIHTC stood for, Low Income Housing Tax Credit. So there's just a lot of opportunity. But now the great thing is, not that I would recommend you guys rely too excessively on large language models, but it's amazing if you just like, I have the Gemini app on my iPhone, and I just ask it sometimes, hey, can you explain to me what XYZ is? And maybe, it's a starting point. But I'm gonna turn to the audience here, because I know Garrett, for example. I mean, you probably jumped into one of the more complex areas of affordable housing development. And speaking of low-income housing tax credits, how did you get up to speed in that field, and how do you still do it as head of communication?
Yeah. Duran, is a great question, and Professor Fershine, a great follow-up. Um, you stay curious. I think that is the name of it. You stay curious because I purposefully I've determined that being a real estate developer myself is probably not my calling in life. I have come to know of myself where my capacity and my brain just starts to do that thing where it just all just mushes together. But I found a lane that I'm pretty good at. And so being able to take that content, siphon it down, and be able to communicate it to the masses in a way that is able to be well received, and move an agenda forward is a specialty that I possess. So I have enough of an understanding of the space to kind of work through the changes and challenges, and then I need to be able to refine that down to the broader audience. There's only so many of us that are doing this kind of work anyway, but there's a whole lot of people out there that need to understand what its impact is if we can get it right. And so I think being able to just stay curious as the information is coming in this environment where so much is changing at once, I'm holding things a little bit more close to the chest instead of just rapid response on everything, because you respond on something one day and then you're wrong about it, 12 hours later. But you also have to take real account because there's actually people's lives that are being touched by some of our work in a very direct way. So it's really kind of a balance of understanding and prioritizing what do I need to know now that's going to affect my immediate day to day, what's in the ethos that is playing out, and I just need to keep my ear sort of tuned to the space, and the in between might be what's the other stuff that's just kind of populating space that you don't know where it's going to grab, between one day or another. And so a little bit, honestly, as you get a little bit deeper into some of the work, you're leaning on those relationships. You're calling up people like Brett or Olivia or Joseph to say like, hey, well, what about this? Or, hey, have you heard about X or Y? And they're like, yeah, we're still thinking about how we're trying to deal with that. These are the conversations that folks are actually having in these spaces. When you think, well, everybody's got it all figured out, they don't. They don't. Maybe a lot of us have to come off like we do because we need to seem like we have it fully buttoned up, but we're all figuring it out too. We are all practitioners, just professional practitioners in some ways. And so I think with that, it's staying curious and not being satisfied, even in this environment, with status quo, and doing what you can to continue to push it forward. I think that application of being really, really dogged about moving the ball forward, staying very curious and staying connected to your network of peers, is that secret sauce. And then when you've got these unique skill sets to sort of add on to it, that is what makes you unique, and dangerous. But my career has gone a variety of different directions, which have, I think, complemented what I'm able and capable of doing in my current context. But I would not be able to do it the way that I'm doing it had it not been for that variety of experiences that folks would look and say like, well, and then you make it make sense. Like, wow, okay, I see it. It's very clear.
We actually have an interview question we almost always ask for candidates that we're hiring, which is, how do you learn an area that you don't know as much about? And it's always interesting to hear people answer it. But to me, the right answer is, well, I'll start by reading whatever I could find. I might then talk to people. I might see a webinar or two. Then I get a little more of a foundation, and then I can have better and better conversations. And that's kind of the name of the game. I have a guy, I just took on a new team that's dealing with stable coins, and I literally don't know what they are. And so I have a guy who's an expert on it. I just have lunch with him, and he just kind of fills me in on it. It's like he's like my lifeline. And now I watched a webinar or two, and read a little bit, start to get that foundation. But it's okay to just admit to yourself and close friends that you don't know anything. Olivia, do you want to just comment on how you've managed to do it over the course of your career?
Yeah, well, I was going to say really similar to Garrett. I mean, curiosity is your friend. I find that people are incredibly willing to talk to you when you show genuine interest and have questions and want to engage on topics. I think I mean, probably this goes without saying, but it can be really, I don't know, intimidating to admit that you might not know something. And one of the ways that I've tried to deal with that is remind myself of those core competencies and what I know I am good at. So, I know that I'm good at relationship building. I know that I'm good at communicating with different people. I know that I can analyze things and synthesize things. And I know I have that expertise. And you can fall back on those core competencies when you're then saying, okay, but I actually have no idea what liquidity is, for example. That's one of the examples that I think back to a lot from Professor Furstein's banking and financial institution policy class. The definition of liquidity and then qualified mortgages, I think back to my time in that class all the time because those were just kind of like foundational definitions that I learned there. And Professor Furstein was always really willing to say, just ask. So I think that that level of curiosity and just kind of continuing to always be engaged and interested is a great way to go.
Yeah. And I feel like, Brett, for you, like the stakes are a lot higher because urban, like, I mean, the bar is so high for you guys that you can't just like putting out a piece that's like wrong and stuff. But how do you deal with that issue given how fast the policy environment changes? I mean, how did you get up to speed on new market tax credits? How did you get up to speed on, opportunity zones, in the early days? How did you do it?
A three-part answer. So, and trying to keep you guys in mind as like, you don't have to be the expert in something, right? Like you have to get oriented, know the space, add value, right? Like I find LinkedIn really helpful to know who's doing what and moving in a certain way. It never gives you the level of depth that you need to know to answer the question, but it lets you know what people are caring about and what institutions are caring about. And so like it is my first like on the radar, where are people in their professional lives? And you build your network in that way. Second, going to groups that are doing the really impactful stuff and getting on their listservs. Like people get daily digests or monthly digests or whatever. And then there's some trade media that's often for free or not very expensive. And they track this in real time. And they're telling you how real estate appraisals are going or not in this current moment, right? Like it gets really niche really quick, but if you've narrowed in on what you care about, the trade media and those institutions and representatives, you got to filter it by like what's their angle and what are they in for. If it's some association and it's very promotional, but it still can be helpful, like what drum they're banging on. So those are two things that I would say very practically. And then the intersection of informational interviews and interview and substantive interviews. So Joseph's right. When I publish something, I have to be the expert, but I don't have to be the expert when I'm figuring something out. I get the luxury of saying, I'm going to interview 380 people about the new market tax credit and spend 60 minutes with them. And at the end of that project, you know a lot and you're actually an expert as well. So my job's a little different in that I get to do so much of that, but you could turn it into a mini research project, even an on-the-job one. It's for this class, it's for this whatever. And in some ways, that's an easier ask than the informational interviews. Sometimes it's like, I'm trying to do this little thing to figure out how LIHTC and opportunity zones can work together in the same project. You have to be the expert. You just have to ask the questions. So anyways, don't be manipulative, but you can find ways to put yourself in spaces where interesting conversations are happening.
That's great. Actually, you mentioned LinkedIn. I must confess, I need to be a better user of LinkedIn to learn. I typically have only relied on it when I'm like doing a job posting or something. But like I was just on this webinar that the Consumer Bankers Association had on stablecoins, and the guy was like, "Well, if you've seen my piece on LinkedIn, you know that XYZ." And I was like, "Wow, I'm not even like paying attention as much as I can." So that's a good example, Brett, of sources. Any other questions from the audience here before I ask another one? All right, I'm going to ask
Actually,
a question.
Joseph,
Oh,
can I just ask one for
yeah,
you all to address?
please.
Because everybody
Yeah.
here is DC, and I know that one of the things from a career perspective we've been talking to people about is looking outside the DMV. Are there recommendations that you would have for people interested in this line of work outside of the DMV, and how they
Such a
approach
good
their
question.
search?
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah, I would wholeheartedly recommend that. I had a student in my class. He just decided he wanted to move to the West Coast. He's now working in that Clackamas County Board of, whatever their, essentially their government board, and he does community development out there. So yeah, I would definitely say, that would be great. The question is, how do you get a foothold? But I'm going to turn to our panel and say and ask you guys, what do you think? I mean, Garrett,
Yeah.
do you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, each of the sort of neighboring counties, as maybe many of you have already seen, have their own local governments that have a division of housing that they are connected with. I'm moderately to modestly connected with most of them in some way, shape, or form. So that's Loudoun County, Fairfax County, Arlington County, Montgomery County, Prince George's. So if you've got an interest, if you've seen a role in any of those spaces, and that's both on the planning side, um, on the development side, like the organization in general, there are folks in leadership that I'm somewhat connected to that I'm more than happy to make a direct appeal to if there's a role that you think really jumps out that you like to be interested in. They tend to pay pretty well because of the region that we're in. B, they tend to have decent kind of like retirement packages, sort of, if you're interested in that and starting to get your savings in early. And C, you're very close, probably A, you're really more close to the work because these are the policymakers who are on the ground when it comes to zoning changes, when it comes to, you hear the conversations around, yes, in my backyard, not in my backyard. That's happening at the local level, right? We have these big conversations out here about how we believe, the nation should move in this direction or that direction, but it's these folks way down here that really are the champions one way or another to see those policies actually come to life and create the communities that you see with the tax dollars that we're all putting in. So that's just a huge plea. DC, obviously, DEMPED, the Department of Economic Development, huge. Nina Albert is their deputy mayor there, and I know they've got a few openings in their shop, depending on your seniority. But there's tons of places to get your feet wet. Baltimore shouldn't be out of the equation. Frederick shouldn't be out of the equation. There's just a lot. Richmond shouldn't be out of the equation. Just in this kind of super region, there's a lot that's happening here, and I'm sure Olivia will co-sign with JP Morgan's presence there too.
Yeah. Anyone
Oh,
else,
yeah.
Olivia or Brett?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree completely with that. I mean, one of the tremendous benefits of this industry, which we've touched on, is that there's a number of partners in the ecosystem, and that's at all levels of government and nationally. So every state has a housing finance agency. Every locality likely has a public housing authority. There's a lot of different ways you can touch this work from sort of the state and local government lens. There's nonprofits and CDFIs at different levels of sort of government or geographic focus. And then I would also say, I mean, our policy work internally at JP Morgan Chase has tended to focus more federal for the last several years. We are launching now a much more concerted state and local focus. And that's the housing policy work that I've been leading. We are sort of initially taking a focus in California, although not exclusively California. And I would say, like, one of the main things that we do when we're looking at our housing policy work is to go to those local groups, either at the municipal level or the state level, that are doing that research and that policy analysis and are connected to the lawmakers and the other practitioners and sort of that existing ecosystem of stakeholders that are advancing policy and really practice informed policy. And so I would say, like, back to kind of positioning yourself for the next role, if your goal ultimately is to go to the national or federal level and do policy or programmatic work, having that state level expertise or experience, or local level, would be incredibly attractive to me if I'm hiring in the future, because part of what we're trying to do is take that deeper local emphasis to this work.
Great. I don't know, Brett, if you had anything to add on international or jobs outside of the DC metro area.
There some subset of jobs which have to happen only in the DC area. I know that. But so much of the way we do federal government is federated to the states or sometimes the counties or cities, and those are really interesting jobs. They're much closer to the impact, and it's not a step down in terms of influence or importance or impact or compensation or livability. So you got to make wise choices. I get it, but like California is doing some really innovative things around some small business finance stuff that I'm looking at, like, and other states in a whole variety of ways. Like, those are more exciting places at the moment than DC to be talking about policy innovation from my personal perspective. So
That's
it's a
great.
big country.
I love that. And I love what you said, Olivia, about how there's a state housing finance agency in every state. I mean, that is so true. So that there's just a ton of jobs there. One question I would ask, for all of our panelists is just sort of, where do you see like the market moving? I know, for example, the tax bill had some additional money put into it for the low-income housing tax credit. Will that result in additional development opportunities for organizations like Garrett's that are doing, that are affordable housing developers? Will banks be making more loans because of that? Is there more opportunity, even though this is a very, very tough time with pullbacks and international and a whole bunch of other things? Where do you see potential growth opportunities for the folks that are attending this panel? I don't know if anyone wants to go first.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, in this region alone, we've got well over 270,000 units of affordable housing that are not constructed or built. We're going to be doing affordable housing for a long time, and that's just in this region. So the need for each of you, all of you, to add your hand to the plow is certainly there and not going anywhere anytime soon. And the opportunities extend, right? It extends to housing is economic development, and so I think if you even kind of frame a little bit of the way you think about where you might land in the work, every piece of our work around housing that's connected to economic mobility, social mobility, health and wellness, there are so many conversations that are happening both in parallel, and perpendicular, that I think are relevant for you to consider. It doesn't just have to be in a housing policy specific role. That may be where you're trying to get to, and that's great. But from these 6 or 7 resources that we posted here, you could literally get lost for the next week looking at all types of different roles. And please, again, we are here to be a resource to you. If we don't have the direct connection, look at our LinkedIn profiles. If you're not already hip to this, you see where there's mutual connections and who knows who. And like that has made so many introductions for myself personally that I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to take advantage of doing that, because once you get that first access, you're kind of off to the races. So I think just know that there's a ton of work that needs to be done in the space, and there's so much that's happening around the space where folks need to plug in. And so there will be no shortage of work that needs to be done. It's just a matter of right opportunity, right time.
That's great.
I know you can all get there.
Brett, any thoughts on that, just in terms of growth that you see?
Just that it will happen. It is happening. And I'll give you an example of the not growth that you all know about, but like climate finance, we all thought was really going to grow. Greenhouse gas reduction fund, a lot of groups were gearing up to deploy in retrofits or solar finance or a bunch of stuff. All that's gone and groups are not doing it. But what are they doing? Well, we got more LIHTC money. New Markets was made permanent. Opportunity zones, we have another go round. There's always state and local stuff that's moving. So just to say that it will crypto, and you might think that's has nothing to do with community development, but actually I had 3 conversations this week about how it does. And so there are industries and sectors that are moving and therefore hiring, and so it just keep watching and be flexible, I guess.
That's great. That's great. Well, I know we're only 5 minutes away from time, and I think we might have lost Olivia because I don't see her anymore. But I think we'll do a last quick go around. Any last thoughts that our panelists want to share for people that might be interested in careers? The one pitch I will give is, as a person who got my MPP from Berkeley, and we were sort of never told to think about the private sector, I would definitely not rule out the private sector, whether it's a bank, whether it's a credit union, whether it's a private company. So that would be my little pitch. I know that sounds sort of contrary sometimes for policy students, but don't forget the private sector. Olivia, we're just doing a final go around of just any last sort of advice to students, and I'll just go the clockwise on my screen. Garrett, you're next.
Olivia, I was going to give you a chance to jump in there if you wanted to.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, guys. My computer crashed and the power went out, but it's back on.
No way. Okay.
No problem, no problem. So I know we only have a couple of minutes here, but I know there's a bunch of folks here who maybe didn't get a chance to ask a question, and I just want to just quickly encourage you with the 5 minutes we have here left. This is a good moment to just jump in, do it scared. I'm not going to call names in other spaces I maybe would, but if you got a question, please, 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 this is a good moment to do so. So with that, I'm going to pause. I've gave y'all enough advice.
I guess my last pontification thought is think about the job you want after this job. How many people out of master's degree end up staying there for more than 2 to 3 years? I mean, some for sure. I actually did, but a lot not, right? So what's the job you want after the job, and how does this job help you get toward that job? I think just taking a little more medium term frame than firing off a bunch of stuff is what I encourage you to think. Have conversation, do your homework, really do your homework, put in the time to know who the groups are in your space. Don't just respond to open things, learn the ecosystem, and then see where you can fit in.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Olivia?
I would just say, I think this echoes what's been said, but don't self-select out of things just because they may be different or not exactly what you may have anticipated. There's a tremendous amount of transferability across all of these jobs and this industry and prior experiences. And I think kind of similar to what I said earlier, defaulting to your core competencies and what you are good at and what you're passionate about and what drives you, that will take you further than a lot of things, because I think people can pick up when you're genuinely interested and engaged in something.
And I'll just say, kind of echoing from where I started, maybe dare to be different and go where people are. There's something unique about being able to connect with folks in person, that they'll share with you things that might not come across the same on a Zoom or on a phone call. And the comfort that it takes to go in cold is a real thing. But I encourage you, because you got nothing to lose. This is the opportunity, and you've done the work. You've stepped into this program. You've excelled at this program. You actually have something to say. You really do. And people want to hear from you. And so I would encourage you to go in cold, go in brave, and you'll be surprised at how well people will respond, knowing especially you're coming with a GW group. Come on.
That's awesome. And so maybe with that, I'll just thank our panelists. They've been awesome. And I think everybody's willing to be a resource. So I put my contact info in the chat. You can reach out to me. Use LinkedIn, use us. However we can help. I'm totally confident that everybody who wants to can get jobs in this sector. And I think there's going to be great growth. So I really appreciate the panel. Thank you so much, Denise, for organizing us. Is there any last thing you wanted to say?
I just want to thank, and I love that you're ending on hopefulness. This is fantastic. This was so informative and inspirational, which is what I think we all need. Joseph, thank you for taking the lead on this and organizing this as a panel. This was tremendous.
It's amazing that we have, I mean, we have this incredible GW alumni network. I mean, these 4 panelists, you know, or 3 panelists all coming out of Trachtenberg in some way, shape, or form. So it was easy for me because I know them all. But, you know, really happy to do it, and good luck with everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Goodbye.